Hello YouTubers and cinephiles, welcome back to another edition of Nerd with me, John Ricky here, and welcome to part 2 of Avengers Cast List 70s edition. So just a quick recap, part 1 was basically the cast of the MCU up until the first Avengers. This part 2 is going from everything that happened after the first Avengers to where it is now with Avengers Infinity War. And also just to reiterate, this is a list about how Marvel films were created in the 70s and maybe they had a technology of like mid to late 90s, basically transporting what we have today to the 70s. How would it look? So let's get to it. First up is Falcon, played excellently by Anthony Mackie, came in during Winter Soldier, and Captain America's right-hand man. My number 3 pick is Jim Kelly. Yeah, from Enter the Dragon, Black Belt Jones. Mainly it's like his kind of appearance is, you know, he almost looks like a 70s version of Anthony Mackie to me. But it just feels like he would really fit the mold of Falcon back then. Next up, my number 2 is Paul Winfield. Man, the 70s were real good to him. I mean, he had Sounder was probably the biggest thing that he did, and he followed it up immediately with Trouble Man, and then a few years later, Gordon's War. He's an incredible actor, and I think he would make a good Falcon. And my number 1 pick is none other than Billy D. Williams. Yes, Mr. Colt 45 himself. I mean, he was having a great run in the 70s. You know, he's in the classic movie Lady Sings the Blues, and he was incredible in that. And of course, he was a part of one of the biggest franchises of film history in Star Wars later on. He would be perfect. I mean, basically, essentially be playing Lando to Captain America's Han. So I think it really would have worked out well. He would have been great. Next up is Scarlet Witch, introduced in Avengers Age of Ultron. Elizabeth Olsen is killing it as Scarlet Witch. She is amazing, she's incredible. But my number 3 pick for Scarlet Witch in the 70s is Barbara Hershey, especially after performing for Martin Scorsese in one of his earlier works with Boxcar Bertha, and then followed it up with Love Comes Quietly, and like she would have been great, like playing that almost like naivety that Scarlet Witch has and quiet strength. My number 2 is Charlotte Rumplings. She played Anne Boleyn in Henry VIII and His 6 Wives, and was in that Sean Connery sci-fi film Zardos. But I just feel she would bring the damage that Scarlet Witch had been through with like the Sokovia and so on and so forth. She would really bring that to the forefront. Anyway, my number 1 for Scarlet Witch is none other than Meryl Streep. I mean, yes, it's Meryl Streep. You know, Sophie's Choice, the list can go on, but, you know, she's coming off of Deer Hunter, which she was amazing in, and she could really bring out the determination and the sadness of Scarlet Witch expertly, without even trying almost. Next on the list is Black Panther, played by incredibly talented Chadwick Boseman in Civil War and in his own Black Panther movie, which was incredible. But taking it back to the 70s, my number 3 pick is Clarence Williams III. Yeah, man, I usually see him, I remember him as more of like the crazy-eyed character, older gentleman you don't know what it's about, but he played a great role, especially back in the 60s and 70s as Link from the Mod Squad. Very popular TV show back then, and I think he would have been incredible if the Marvel films were being made back then. My number 2 pick for Black Panther is Calvin Lockhart, who in the 70s starred in The African Deal, as well as Uptown Saturday Night. I mean, hey, in The African Deal, he played pure African, and I think he would have been a great choice for Black Panther. And my number 1 pick for Black Panther in the 70s is Yaphet Kotto. I'm going off the fact that he was in Alien. He just looks like he just came from there. He exudes that type of like royalty especially for back in the 70s. I mean, he even played a Bond villain in Live and Let Die. I think he would have been incredible as the Prince and future King of Wakanda. Next up is one of the many Guardians of the Galaxy, and its leader, give or take, Star-Lord. Played excellently by Chris Pratt, a more hilarious Han Solo in his own right. But my number 3 pick for Star-Lord in the 70s has to be Peter Fonda, man. I mean, you watch Easy Rider, I mean, that's basically Star-Lord right there, except, you know, with motorcycles and 60s and so on and so forth. But I feel he just has that cool demeanor about him. I think would be very good for Star-Lord back in the day. My number 2 is Michael Douglas. I mean, you look at most of the movies that he's done. I mean, he's played mostly the rogue, the braggadocious, bravado, putting on a show. I mean, he would exude what Star-Lord is as we know him today. And he would have been great back then. My number 1 is none other than the man, the legend, Jeff Bridges, man. I mean, dude is amazing. He can play a nerd, he can play a jock, he can play a ruthless drunkard. I mean, he would be incredible as a, hey man, it's like, you know, just a space surfing vagabond that gets into trouble. He'd bring levels to it that would be great. Now on that note, we're moving on to his bestie and sometimes lover, all-around badass herself, Gamora, played excellently by Zoe Saldana. I mean, she's incredible in this role. In the 70s, my number 3 pick for Gamora would have to be Beverly D'Angelo. Yeah, we all know her now as Ellen Griswold in National Lampoon's Vacation, but she was great as Patsy Cline in Coal Miner's Daughter, and I could see her possibly being a badass if she wanted to be, but she would also bring that vulnerability to Gamora. My number 2 for Gamora is none other than Pam Grier. Dude, she would bring the badassery to the surface with how she was in Coffee and a whole bunch of other blaxploitation films. I mean, she definitely would be able to handle the action from back then, but she's also a great actress. She would have been able to bring out the vulnerability and the damage of dealing with Thanos and so on and so forth. Would have been incredible as Gamora. And my number 1 pick for Gamora is none other than the Scream Queen herself, Jamie Lee Curtis. Now, I know it's kind of an odd pick because she's a Scream Queen, but you know what? Like, in her later roles, she's played very strong characters throughout the years, and she can bring both the strong and the vulnerability, like I said, with the others. She'd be a really nice mix and match with Gamora's sensibilities. Next up is the goofy alien bruiser known as Drax. Played surprisingly well by Dave Bautista, and I can't really see anybody today that could really take his place. But in the 70s, my number 3 pick is a gentleman by the name of Bolo Young. Yeah, the big guy that Bruce Lee trashed real quick in Enter the Dragon, but also the main villains in both Bloodsport and Double Impact. Even though he probably couldn't speak a word of English, but I think they could have rectified that, probably would have dubbed over his voice or something like that. His look would be incredible for Drax. Number 2 is none other than Arnold Schwarzenegger. In the 70s, he didn't really have a big resume. I mean, mainly Hercules in New York. That was a terrible movie. But he does have that charm, that pizzazz. I'm sure he would have made a great Drax back then. And my number 1 pick for Drax is none other than Sylvester Stallone. Yeah, I mean, really think about it. Think about it, Rocky as a character. I mean, he's really a meathead, not really that intelligent, but he's so endearing. You can see Stallone play Drax as this, I don't know, social cues type of, almost, you know, on the scale of like autism, but still just a brawler in his own right. I think he would have been great as Drax back in the 70s. And next up is the goofy, sarcastic, wise-ass raccoon, Rocket Raccoon. Played excellently by Bradley Cooper, or voiced expertly by Bradley Cooper. Back in the 70s, my number 3 pick is Frank Oz. I mean, yes, the man that did Yoda, whole bunch of other puppets. I think he would have been great. He's a great actor and so on and so forth. Good director. But I think he really would have brought Rocket Raccoon to life back in those days. Next up, number 2 is Harvey Keitel, man. I mean, yes, he worked with Martin Scorsese on Mean Streets. I mean, Rocket Raccoon just sounds like, I mean, the way Bradley Cooper does it, he just sounds like he just came out of the streets of New York, you know, and I think Harvey Keitel would have embodied that expertly. And my number 1 pick for Rocket Raccoon gotta be the man, the legend, Dennis Hopper, man. I mean, he can play crazy, he can play goofy, he can play sardonic and like just malicious if he wants to be. Man, that's a whole bunch of Rocket Raccoon right there, and I think he would embody that with just using his voice in such a way that it would just be incredible, man. Next up is the all-powerful android himself, Vision, played excellently by Paul Bettany since Age of Ultron, with his almost naivety and intelligence that's like incredible. My number 3 pick in the 70s is none other than the android himself, Anthony Daniels, who played C-3PO in Star Wars. Yeah, like back then there's a lot of typecasting. And dude, he's like the perfect android. I think he would be great as the all-knowing Vision, and it would have been awesome. My number 2 pick for Vision is none other than the legend, Christopher Lee. I mean, hell, he's already been in 3 of the major franchises in film history with Star Wars, James Bond, and Lord of the Rings. Like, come on. It's like, might as well add another one to it. And you can see him as a hyper-intelligent robot that has some emotion. And my number 1 pick for Vision is none other than Michael Caine, man. I mean, he just exudes that aura, you know, where he can even make you believe that you can sympathize with an android. I mean, hell, he made you sympathize with Philanderer and a gangster and Get Carter and Alfie respectively beforehand. I think he could handle an android, and it would have been magnificent. Next up is the mystic master himself, Doctor Strange, played excellently by Benedict Cumberbatch. I mean, he looks like Doctor Strange for the comics, and he portrays him very well from what I know. But in the 70s, my number 3 pick is none other than Donald Sutherland, man. I mean, back then, I mean, you could really see him being this hotshot doctor that loses the use of his hands during an accident and just being brought down a peg or two, being very arrogant like Doctor Strange is. He would have been incredible as Stephen Strange. My number 2 pick, and this is a wild one, is Bruce Lee. I mean, just imagine it. Yes, you can see him performing the acts that Doctor Strange does, and plus the philosophy that he had in life would really work incredibly for the character of Stephen Strange. And my number 1 choice for Doctor Strange is none other than Leonard Nimoy. I mean, come on, man. He played Spock. Spock was incredible. I mean, really, if you take away the fact that he's a Vulcan, you can see him being Doctor Strange. He just encompasses that regalness, you know, he can bring that arrogance out too, but in a very calm demeanor. I mean, he would have been amazing as the Mystic Master. And next up is young Peter Parker, the neighborhood Spider-Man, played excellently by Tom Holland in present day. But back then, there's only one person I could really think of that would be a great Peter Parker in the 70s, and that's none other than Mark Hamill, man. I mean, think about it. He's Luke Skywalker, he's naive as hell, but he's ready to go. Man, who else can you really say? Honestly, he would have been amazing as the neighborhood Spider-Man. I mean, I don't know what else I could really say about that. And plus, I really couldn't think of anybody else, but he is an amazing, amazing choice for back in the 70s Peter Parker. Next up and last of all is the Mad Titan himself, Thanos, played superbly by Josh Brolin present day, and wow. But enough about that. For this one, I couldn't leave it at 3. I had to give it about 5, and you'll understand why once I reveal them. My number 5 pick for Thanos is Robert Duvall. Yeah, I mean, think about him in Apocalypse Now. He's more more sympathetic of the other choices, but he's been a villain. He's been a side character. He's been this and that. I mean, I could really see him bringing home Thanos' duality with what he has to do, even though he's cold-hearted. He can be cold-hearted at times. I mean, come on, the napalm scene with Apocalypse Now says enough. My number 4 pick is none other than Jack Nicholson, man. I mean, dude, he played the Joker excellently, and his role in Easy Rider was great. He was amazing as a very charismatic character in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest in the 70s, and I think he could have really brought that great balance of like sadisticness of Thanos as well as the sensibleness of Thanos, especially towards Gamora. But you can see him just thinking wrecking shop and just all about his business on that. Pick number 3 for Thanos is none other than Gene Hackman. The man is amazing. He's regal. He has this presence about him where you're just like, man, you don't want to mess with him. And that's the feel of Thanos. And you can see him really relishing in the chaos that he, with calm demeanor though. My number 2 pick for Thanos is the icon, the legend, Marlon Brando, man. I mean, yeah, he was great in the 70s as Vito Corleone. I mean, he was calm, fatherly, but can rip it if you need be. And then you have him in Apocalypse Now, where he's just sadistic and crazy, but very, very enlightening. And that is Thanos too. And you can see him having no qualms with wiping out half the civilization of whatever planet he goes to. I mean, you can see him doing that with regal efficiency and even have a sensibility to it that would have been just phenomenal. And my number 1 for Thanos in the 70s is none other than Ricardo Montalban. I mean, think about Star Trek Wrath of Khan. He was great, and he really brings this regal Shakespearean type performance to most of his characters, and he has this poise, this cool, calm, cagey beast type of persona that he brings to all of his characters, and it's just so transfixing. He's like a snake, and that is what Thanos is too, because you're just like, man, he's really charming and so on and so forth. I think it would have been incredible if Ricardo Montalban was the Mad Titan Thanos. Wow. And on that note, that concludes my list of the 70s edition of Avengers movies. That cast. What do you think about it? Do you have any picks of your own? Please comment, like, subscribe to Nerd With Me. What do you think about this? Do you have your own lists? Let's talk about this, everyone. Cinephiles and YouTubers, y'all take care now.